Chapter 15. A Snake Has a Snack. It was hotter than blazes in South Dakota. In Sioux Falls, Gramps took off his shirt. Passing Mitchell, Graham unbuttoned her dress down to her waist. Just beyond Chamberlain, Gramps took a detour to the Missouri River. He parked the car beneath a tree overlooking a sandy bank. Graham and Gramps kicked off their shoes. It was quiet and hot, hot, hot. All you could hear was a crow calling somewhere upriver and the distant sound of cars along the highway. The hot air pressed against my face, and my hair was like a hot, heavy blanket draped on my neck and back. It was so hot you could smell the heat baking the stones and dirt along the bank. Graham pulled her dress up over her head, and Gramps undid his buckle and let his pants slide to the ground. They started kicking water at each other and scooping it up and letting it run down their faces. They walked into where it was knee-deep and sat down. "Come on, Chickabiddy," Gramps called. Graham said, "It's delicious." I gazed up and down the river. Not a soul in sight. The water looked cool and clear. Graham and Gramps sat there in the river, grinning away. I waded in and sat down. It was nearly heaven, with that cool water rippling and a high, clear sky all around us and trees waving along the banks. My hair floated all around me. My mother's hair had been long and black like mine, but a week before she left, she cut it. My father said to me, "Don't cut yours, Sal. Please don't cut yours." My mother said, "I knew you wouldn't like it if I cut mine." My father said, "I didn't say anything about yours." "But I know what you're thinking," she said. "I loved your hair, sugar," he said. I saved her hair. I swept it up from the kitchen floor and wrapped it in a plastic bag and hid it beneath the floorboards of my room. It was still there, along with the postcard she sent. As Graham, Gramps, and I sat in the Missouri River, I tried not to think of the postcards. I tried to concentrate on the high sky and the cool water. It would have been perfect except for that ornery crow calling away, "Car, car, car." "Will we be here long?" I asked. The boy came out of nowhere. Gramps saw him first and whispered, "Get behind me, Chickabiddy. You too," he said to Graham. The boy was about 15 or 16 with shaggy dark hair. He wore blue jeans and no shirt, and his chest was brown and muscular. In his hand, he held a long Bowie knife, its sheath fastened to his belt. He stood next to Gramps' pants on the bank. I thought of Phoebe and knew that if she were here, she would be warning us that the boy was a lunatic who would hack us all to pieces. I was wishing we had never stopped at the river and that my grandparents would be more cautious, maybe even a little more like Phoebe, who saw danger everywhere. As the boy stared at us, Gramps said, "Howdy." The boy said, "This here's private property." Gramps looked all around. "Is it? I didn't see any signs." "It's private property." "Why, heck," Gramps said, "this here's a river. I never heard of no river being private property." The boy picked up Gramps' pants and slid his hand into a pocket. "This land where I'm standing is private property." I was frightened of the boy and wanted Gramps to do something, but Gramps looked cool and calm. He sounded as if he hadn't a care in the world, but I knew that he was worried by the way he kept inching in front of me and Graham. I felt around the riverbed, pulled up a flat stone and skimmed it across the water. The boy watched the stone, counting the skips. A snake flickered along the bank and slid into the water. "See that tree?" Gramps said. He pointed to an old willow leaning into the water where the boy stood. "I see it," the boy said, sliding his hand into another of Gramps' pockets. Gramps said, "See that knothole? Watch what this here Chickabiddy can do to a knothole." Gramps winked at me. The veins in his neck were standing out. You could practically see the blood rushing through them. I felt around the riverbed and pulled up another flat, jagged rock. I had done this 1,000,000 times in the swimming hole in Bybanks. I pulled my arm back and tossed the rock straight at the tree. One edge embedded itself in the knothole. The boy stopped rummaging through Gramps' pockets and eyed me. Gramps said, "Oh!" and flailed at the water. She reached down, pulled up a snake, and gave Gramps a puzzled look. "It's a water moccasin, isn't it?" she said. "It's a poisonous one, isn't it?" The snake slithered and wriggled, straining toward the water. "I do believe it has had a snack out of my leg." She stared hard at Gramps. The boy stood on the bank holding Gramps' wallet. Gramps scooped up Gram and carried her out of the water. "Would you mind dropping that thing?" he said to Gram, who was still clutching the snake. To me, he said, "Get on out of there, chickabiddy." As Gramps put Gram on the riverbank, the boy came and knelt beside her. "I'm sure glad you have that knife," Gramps said, reaching for it. As he made a slit in Gram's leg across the snake bite, blood trickled down her ankle. I grabbed Gram's hand as she stared up at the sky. Gramps knelt to suck out the wound, but the boy said, "Here, I'll do it." The boy placed his mouth against Gram's bloody leg. He sucked and spit, sucked and spit. Gram's eyelids fluttered. "Can you point us to a hospital?" Gramps said. The boy nodded as he spit. Gramps and the boy carried Gram to the car and settled her in the back seat while I snatched their clothes from the riverbank. We placed Gram's head on my lap and her feet on the boy's lap, and all the while the boy continued sucking and spitting. In between, he gave directions to the hospital. Gram held on to my hand. Gramps, still in his boxer shorts and dripping wet, carried Gram into the hospital. The boy's mouth hovered over her leg the whole time, sucking and spitting. Gram spent the night in the hospital. In the waiting room, the boy from the riverbank sprawled in a chair. I offered him a paper towel. "You've got blood on your mouth," I said. I handed him a $50 bill. "My grandfather said to give you this. That's all the cash he has right now. He said to tell you thanks. He'd come out himself, but he doesn't want to leave her." He looked at the $50 bill in my hand. "I don't need it." "You don't have to stay," I said. He glanced around the waiting room. "I know it." He looked away and then said, "I like your hair." "I was thinking of cutting it." "Don't." I sat down beside him. He said, "It wasn't really private property." I didn't think so. Later, when I went in to see Gram, she was all tucked up in bed, pale and sleepy. Next to her on the narrow bed, Gramps was lying on top of the covers, stroking her hair. A nurse came in and made him get off the bed. He had by now put his pants on, but he looked a wreck. I asked Gram how she was feeling. She blinked her eyes a few times and said, "Piddles." Gramps said, "They must have given her something. She doesn't know what she's saying." I leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Gram, don't leave us." "Piddles," Gram said. When the nurse left the room, Gramps climbed back on top of the bed and lay down next to Gram. He patted the bed. "Well," he said, "this ain't our marriage bed, but it'll do.